102 candidates. That's how many people were running to become the next mayor of Toronto. You know, we spoke to one of them. We spoke to the dog. Remember Molly the dog and her owner, Toby Heaps? He ended up getting 593 votes. Did not win the election. But that job that opened up after John Tory's surprise resignation over an affair with an ex-staffer, we did find out last night who will be the next mayor of Toronto, and it's Olivia Chow. With more on this, let's head to Toronto and join Natalie Johnson, CTV Toronto's City Hall reporter. Natalie, welcome to CJAD 800.
Good morning.
So, Natalie, let me put the cards on the table here. We're in Montreal. We find Toronto very funny. We look at your gigantic condos overlooking highways, and we find that funny. We're kind of curious about Toronto because we don't understand the whole vibe at times. We arrive in downtown Toronto and we see people in suits, and they're all talking about business deals, and we don't get that in in Montreal, right? We're very cultural based, not finance based. So, why don't you explain this race for the Toronto mayor to a Montreal audience? Just how significant is this win by Olivia Chow?
Well, this is a very different mayor for Toronto. I mean, Toronto has been under a conservative mayor for 13 years now. We had Rob Ford, as I'm sure everybody knows, and then we had 3 terms of John Tory, or, well, not quite 3, because we all know what happens in the 3rd term. John Tory stepping down after admitting to having an affair with a junior staffer and setting this whole by-election in motion. But Toronto had a very right-wing mayor for a number of years, and this election brings Olivia Chow to power. She's a progressive candidate. She's a card-carrying New Democrat. And she came to the office last night with a promise to restore affordability, to build a more caring and compassionate city. So a very different approach to leading the city that we've seen for the last number of years.
So we see yet another Canadian city go with a progressive mayor. We know all about that here in Montreal. We've seen it in other Canadian cities as well. So what is Olivia Chow promising the people of Toronto? What were those issues that everyone in Toronto is frustrated and angry about that Olivia Chow promises to solve?
Well, Chow really wrote out this campaign promising a vision of hope. And she was short on specifics in her platform, but the overarching theme was that she would be helping those who have fallen through the cracks of the system. Improving housing and homelessness was a big component of that. But her critics went after her throughout the campaign for saying, how are you going to pay for all of these promises? She would not say exactly how much she intended to raise property taxes, for example. Was talking in terms of feelings and themes, I would say, as opposed to giving a lot of specifics on exactly how she was going to approach some of these big questions for the city. But ultimately, it did not matter. Her message resonated with voters, and it was enough to carry her into the office. It was not the runaway victory that her campaign had predicted. We'd expected a very quick result turnaround last night. It ended up taking about an hour to declare her victorious. She won by about 5%, so it was a closer race than the polls had predicted. Her runner-up, Anna Bailão, had received a last-minute endorsement from John Tory, the mayor who had stepped down, and that did seem to be enough to boost her in the polls in the last minute to give Olivia Chow a run for her money here.
So let's look at how that voting turnout. You mentioned that the 5-point victory for Olivia Chow. And I just want to know because Toronto has had, you mentioned it before, mayors who were quote unquote on the right for 13 years, right? So, what happened here? Because there's 102 candidates. Was there a fracture of voters that were center right, and they just split up the votes? Or was the same thing happening with Olivia Chow and other progressives? How did that break down?
There was a lot of vote splitting, mostly in the center of the spectrum and to the right. With 102 candidates, it was an unprecedented number of people on the ballot. But often in Toronto, you'll see a lot of people on the ballot. It only costs $200 and 25 signatures to run for mayor. So it's not uncommon that you would see dozens of people, sign up, whether they're serious or not. The difference here in this by-election was that there was a number of very high-profile candidates with credible political experience, about 10 or 12 of them, who would be household names to the people who follow politics, who had signed up to run. This was a snap by-election. The campaign period was much shorter than it would be in a general election. And nobody had been preparing for this, right? When John Tory stepped down, it was a surprise to everybody. And all of a sudden, a lot of people started saying, hey, maybe I could run for this job. This is maybe my time to run. So what we ended up with was a bit of a confusing ballot for a lot of people, where you had a lot of big names signing up to run. And there was no clear challenger to the progressive side from the get-go. Olivia Chow was pulling way ahead out of the gate. And the rest of the vote was fairly fractured, fairly split. And it wasn't until John Tory stepped sort of out of his quiet private life last week to release a video endorsing Anna Bailão that there seemed to be a bit of sentiment coalescing around Anna Bailão as the candidate to support for anybody who wasn't interested in electing Olivia Chow.
We're with Natalie Johnson. Natalie's CTV Toronto's City Hall reporter. We're talking about their big election that Toronto had last night. So, Natalie, Toronto now has a progressive mayor. Here's my question, though. Is Toronto a progressive city?
I think it depends on who you ask. Toronto voters are famously fickle when it comes to the type of politicians who they choose to elect. There's a lot of difference between, the downtown contingent, for example, who's historically been more progressive, versus the voters in the outer lying areas of the city. We've had progressive mayors in the past, not recently. We've had more conservative mayors, as I say, more recently. But there's a lot of difference, a lot of diversity within the city. And so Olivia Chow represents certainly a component of the city that has felt underrepresented in municipal politics for a number of years now. And you could certainly see on social media last night, the sentiment of a lot of those voters who were relieved in many ways that finally we would have a mayor that would be investing in services again. On the flip side, the city is really struggling financially right now with the after effects of COVID. And the big question to somebody who is intending to invest in services is, where is the money going to come from?
Last night, Natalie, I spoke to a friend of mine who now lives in Toronto. Every Montrealer has friends who now live in Toronto. And he told me, if I get kicked out or if I have to move out of my current apartment, I will not be able to afford another place. I may move back to Montreal. How bad, or, just tell me, how is the housing situation in Toronto?
The housing situation is awful. The cost of living here has really gone up over the last number of years, and the city is in a housing crisis. There is not enough housing for the people who want to live in the city. The cost of renting has skyrocketed, and it has really been a deterrent for a lot of people who are looking to stay in the city, perhaps to raise a family here. Obviously, the homelessness issue has grown significantly in the last couple of years as well, exacerbated by the pandemic. And housing was a main theme of this campaign among all of the candidates who argued that something needs to be done. There's a lot of red tape at City Hall when it comes to building new housing, whether it's market rent housing or subsidized. And all of the candidates had a different approach as to how they would accelerate that process. Olivia Chow has really been appealing to renters as far as offering supports to them, increasing the reach of the rent bank, for example, and building new housing in the next number of years. And that will be a big challenge for her when she takes over the office at City Hall, because the city really does need to get more homes built right away.
Natalie, we're going to have to leave it there. If you ever feel the need to be on Cool Montreal Radio, you just reach out. We'll come up with a subject, okay?
You just give me a call.
Thanks so much, Natalie. That is Natalie Johnson, CTV Toronto City Hall reporter.